On this episode of Captain Chaos's Laboratory, we're going to be opening a base. Excuse me. This base is the base to the Village Undertaker, and the house sits here in this nice rectangular spot of dust. And this plugs the house in, and then you have things that go around the outside edges, you can see by the dust, and it rotates, and then the house plays its music, and it gets its power from right there, and it has an off-on switch, which that off-on switch sends the power to the motor that spins this ring, as well as the 4.5 volts up to the house. The reason I'm taking it apart is, this one functions fine. I can show you, but it's a functional piece. I was asked a question regarding the distribution board that's in here, and it's a rarer piece. It took me years before I could get one that I could afford, and you see it rotating. And then there's 4.5 volts sitting here now. So it's a rarer piece. Switch works. And somebody has one that the distribution board that separates the power is failed, burnt, broke, etc. So we're going to open it up to take a look. Just going to tuck this 4.5 volt head inside so it doesn't damage the plastics. So we got all these screws right here. There are no screws underneath the 4 pads, at least not on my model. I'm sure they're all the same. So we'll take out the ring of screws. Longest part of every disassembly. All the screws. It's not working. And it says right here, the print you can't read, the input is DC 4.5 volts, 750 milliamps, and then the output of the one that's on top is 4.5 volts at 750 milliamps. Because the distribution board is probably in parallel to the motor that runs the actual spinning platform, meaning that it's not in series, so the power would be the same going up to the top. This screw is just spinning, so I have a funny feeling it's stripped. There we go. And make sure I'm not wrong that there are no screws. There's no screw there. Nope, no screws. Okay. Got them all. Alrighty. So if you've taken apart different ones that have bases, that have these rotating bases with this large inner gear ring, you're probably familiar with this disassembly process, because they always make it so you can't pull this ring out. It's such a treat. So the distribution board is right here. I'm going to align it. We have the power that comes in. The white wire, which is the negative, goes to the switch. Then that converts it to a gray wire that goes to the board. And this yellowish gray wire that comes in, which is the hot, goes to... Oh, wait, they have this one backwards. Never mind. The yellowish gray wire is the ground. On all the other ones I've taken apart, the white's been the ground. So I had that backwards, I'm sorry. White is hot, the grayish yellow, yours might be slightly different color, is negative, and then the white wire turns into a black wire to the circuit board. And that is just nasty sticky. Getting that sticky stuff everywhere. Looks like the distribution board is soldered in. So let's grab a spudger. I'm going to use a plastic spudger. I'm going to use a wide-headed one to See if I can get some leverage on this thing. There we go. There, now it's broke free. So this distribution board only has one component on it, and I cannot read it because it's so tiny. So I'm going to put on some magnifying specs. But we have the two wires that come in from the power and the switch. Then we have the two wires that go out to this motor here, and then we have the two wires that go up to power the house on top. And right here is an itty bitty little surface mount component, which cannot tell what it is. I'm looking. It's a capacitor. Wow, the print's really small. Well, I cannot read what the print says. So, we're going to pull out a handy dandy meter. You could, if you have a multimeter, you can set it to capacitance. So, and that's the symbol right there. Yours is similar. It was like two plates side by side, and it says nanofarad on the side. And let's see what this little guy is, because the person that has it needs to rebuild the circuit board or replace it. And since it has a capacitor, which is probably a smoothing capacitor, so it doesn't pick up any noise from this motor, it's probably close to, oh, I know on the bigger ones are 1,000. I don't know what this one is because I can't read it. 23 nanofarads. Nope. Let me try to get a better connection here. 1.36 nanofarads is this capacitor. So, if you pardon me for a second, I'm not ignoring y'all. I'm going to pull up on the phone. I'm going to convert that to micro. I used to know how to do it in my head, but unfortunately, there's a lot of things in life that you forget, and this is one of them. So 1.36 nanofarad is, well, yeah, 0.00136 microfarad. So it's a really small capacitor. So if you're going to redo this, you would need, I don't even know if they go that small. You need a really small capacitor. Let's just check where this capacitor goes on the circuitry tracks. So I have a funny feeling, like I said, it goes to the motor. So yes, the power comes in, goes across the capacitor, it goes through all the tracks, and the capacitor is a smoothing capacitor. It's there to absorb the noise that comes in from the power supply, because it's before the motor, not after the motor. So it smooths the noise from the power supply, probably so you don't get jittery noise in the motor or the volume slash sound slash lights on the top piece. So if this gets broken or fails, it's actually really easy to replicate. You can literally just solder or connect with a wire connector or a butt connector, a crimp connector. I'd say a wire nut, but I don't like using wire nuts, even though they make small ones, unless there's a crimp-on wire nut. But if you connect the white, red, and white for the upper part together, and then connect on this one it's gray, black, and this one's actually gray. my light is giving a shadow, but when I have the magnifiers on, it's gray. So if you connect the gray, and black wire together, and then if you get I'd probably just get a 0.5 micro or 1 microfarad capacitor and solder the negative to the negative side and the positive to the positive side, so it jumps it. It should do the same thing for you as far as cleaning up the noise in the circuitry. This could be a direct drive system. It doesn't really need this board. This board has options for components on it that it doesn't have. Resistors. It's labeled for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 resistors, 1 big capacitor, an inductor, a power port. So this board is probably just a generic board. They just bypassed all of the components, probably to save money. But you technically don't need this board. If you just put the 3 positives, 3 negatives together, it'll work fine. But you might get flickering or distortion in the house lights that sits on top of this platform because of the noise, because power supplies, especially the ones from Lemax, are very, very noisy. So I would probably at that point just, if they're too noisy, it's too flickery, I just solder across a 1 microfarad capacitor across the negative and positive. And here's your gearbox. Since it's open, it's pretty standard. This one is slathered in grease, as you can probably see. I mean, it's just all over it. We got the pulley on the bottom. It's got the impossible gear right there. It's got the standard 10 tooth off the pulley. The motor is a 300 CA, and this one is actually listed as a SFF 300 CA. So the motor's standard. The gears are standard. The one gear is really hard to find. If you can find it, it is super expensive. And then you have your big transfer gear here, which transfers all this energy into this big ring. So if you have this piece, again, it's a rarer piece, so not a lot of people have it apparently. And you open it up and this thing has burnt or broke, you can replace it. If it is damaged, because it is just a transfer board, means it just transfers power from one power source and splits it into 2 other power sources. So it's a splitter. Check the components. Either this motor is failing and overdrawing because it's starting to short out, which is very possible. With this much grease, the motor could actually absorb the grease in through the screw holes that are holding into the plastic. Or the house that sits on top has a problem and it's got a short, so it's pulling increased power through this pigtail end, and that can also cause the board to burn out. Most likely this capacitor would be the thing that fails, because it would get it would overheat and pop. I mean, it is possible that the board breaks free from its hot glue and gets tangled up in the mechanism. That's still pretty iffy. It's pretty well clear of everything that moves. But if you have this piece and you are having an issue and you open it up and you're not getting power to this top cord for your house, you use a voltmeter and you test your power, and it's your distribution board, you can bypass the board. It's not a required piece. It's an optional piece that they put in probably to save money. You can twist all the wires together, the 3 hots and the 3 negatives. You can solder or twist into another capacitor. Very simple. But if this board is burnt or these wires are burnt and it just didn't desolder, check this motor, because the motors are the most common thing that cause failures in most all animated houses. And then next, check the house. The house is not animated, it just has lights and sound. But you could have a LED or 2 that are failed and they're shorted out, which overdraws the circuitry for the lighting. It is extremely rare, but it does happen. I've had 2 out of the hundreds of houses I've repaired, 2 that had shorted out LEDs that were causing the failures, that were causing the problems that led to the house needing to be repaired. Normally a shorted out LED doesn't affect it too much, but in some cases it screws with the circuitry. This circuitry won't get screwed with, but the blob chip in the Village Undertaker house would get screwed with. So So it's a pretty easy thing to work on. You just got a buttload of screws. Make sure when you put it back together, you line everything up. You got to make sure all these line up in their respective spots. Not terribly difficult, but you know, sometimes it gets frustrating. This one, I'm not going to do anything with the grease. It is got plenty of it. It's not discolored. I have no black forming around the moving gears where it means the shaft or the gear is wearing down. I have no yellowed discoloration on my teeth. This is an older piece. I think it had a date on here. Could be wrong. Make sure you only lose the Lemax adapters. Yeah, no date. So can't tell you exactly when, but I know that it was a harder to find piece. It's got to be within the last 11 years because this circuit board is actually dated 12/6/2011. That is the patent date of that circuit board. So this thing is within the last 11 years. So, but if you have this piece, cool. It took me years to get it. I do love it. I'm only taking it apart so I can see how the board's made so we can replicate it for somebody else. And figure if I'm taking it apart, I might as well show you the process. So if you have this piece, or you have a rotating base in general where the house is separate, or it has the separate pigtail for the house, you can open it up and see that it's not so scary. And it's a very easy thing to work on. You just got to be careful that when you move it over, you don't tear the wires. But if it's something like this where there's only 3 wires and one small discrete component, it's really simple to repair. So that'll take care of this one. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them below. Thanks for watching. Until the next repair video, which, if I have a repair, or if it's not just a tear down to show you what's inside, we'll see you then. Have a good one. Here is the piece, the rotating base, and there's the house that sits on top with its soundtrack going. If it'll focus. So, but that's how this piece is. Figured I'd show you at the end that the Village Undertaker with the free sitting house that plugs into that power port and then has the rotating ring with the characters. We'll add some light. You can see how dusty they are. That way you can see the whole house. You can see it's the hearse with the skulls and bones just buried. The dual. Horse-drawn casket. Coffin cart being pulled by an enslaved human, it looks like. The Grim Reaper with a coffin on a hand truck. Another ghoul with a slave skeleton since he's got his hands bound and is being dragged. But that is the base that we just took apart. There it is back together. So in case you've never seen this piece, here you go. Thanks again for watching.